Young fella, you give me permission to publish this interview on social media.
I do, yes. My name is Brennan Ramsey. Yeah, I'm down in Texas. I had a very interesting childhood. When I was born, my mom, she had grown up in the Catholic Church. I was born into the Catholic Church, and up until about fourth grade, I attended the Catholic school. Shortly thereafter, she converted over to Pentecostal, and we had adopted a young man who had a myriad of health issues, cerebral palsy, and a whole bunch of others. And he was very, very disabled. When I was about 12, he passed away. He was about 8 years old or so. And at that time, also, my stepdad, he abandoned our family and went off and go lived his life. And at that point, I was completely frustrated with the legalism of the church. Anybody who's familiar with Pentecostal Assembly of God, you already know their style. And the Catholic Church is very strict as well. So anyhow, when I was about 13, I turned my back on all the Christian walk, the church, Christ, everything. And I started to practice witchcraft. I made a deal with the enemy, and I did that for a while. When I was about 14-ish, I left home, and I hit the road up until I don't know, probably about 16 or so. I was in Georgia. I lived in Georgia for a while over in the Appalachians. There was this family. They were of the holiness movement. To give that kind of like a summary, they're the snake handlers. They also were very religious, etc. In 1994, when I turned 18, I joined the military. We were running and I couldn't breathe. And I said, God, if you heal my lungs, I'll live for you and tell others about it. Immediately, he healed my lungs. And I didn't have any more problems. I did my time in the military, got out of the military, and I wasn't really able to find a job. So my mom, she had come to visit, and in the process of getting out of the military, employers will send letters and stuff, recruitment letters. And I had responded to one of them for a telecommunications company, corporation, and my mom took me up to go do the testing. They called me. They're just like, hey, Brennan, we would like for you to come and do some testing. So I said, sure, no problem. So we went up there and I signed in and stuff to do the testing, and I sat down and I had the paper in front of me, and I didn't understand much of it because my experience in communications had been in the military, and the civilian sector was just a little bit different. So my mom prayed. She asked for God's will to be done. And when I was looking at those exams, I didn't understand any of it. But I tell you what, though, I passed all of those exams, and it's, for the glory of God. When I was in the military, the whole reason I joined the military is because the woman that I had been dating, she had done something, and my heart was just broken and devastated. So I didn't have anything else to lose. So I joined the military in '94. We were running, and I couldn't breathe, and I was really concerned. I was afraid that they were going to kick me out under a medical discharge, which would not have been good at all. So out of a place of desperation, I prayed and I asked God. I said, God, if you heal my lungs, I'll live for you and I'll tell others about it. And immediately he healed my lungs. I was in rapid deployment units the entire time. Spent my time in the mountains and the deserts and all over the place. I loved it. I got out of the military and I was responding to one of the recruitment letters that had been sent to me, and they wanted me to come do some testing. The job was for a technician on telecommunications equipment. So I told my mom about it, and she and I went up there. And before I went in the building, it was over in Dallas, over at the AT&T building. Then we prayed. and we asked for God's will to be done. I went in there, sat down at the testing room, looked at the test, and I didn't understand any of it. But I filled in what I thought I knew, and and there were 3 sets of exams. So I left. The next day, the hiring manager for that organization called me up and said, "Hey, Brennan, you passed all the exams, and I'd like for you to come in here for another interview." I said, "All right, sure. I'll be up there in about 40 minutes," because at the time I was living south of Fort Worth and I had to go to Dallas. And he said, "Well, that's not going to work." And I said, "Well, I don't know what to tell you, man." And he said, "So there's a hiring manager over in Fort Worth, and he's looking for somebody to start pulling cable." And he said, "If you want, I can give you his number, call him up, and see what y'all can work out. I'll let him know." So I called the guy up, and I tried very desperate for about a week or two. And he called me back and he said, "You know what, Brandon, I've never met anybody as tenacious as you." And he said, "Come on in here. Let's talk." So I went up there, we talked, and I began my career in telecommunications as a wire puller. While being a wire puller, I was also being apprenticed by the senior technicians. They were teaching me the ins and the out of technology and how to interact with customers. And my responsibilities included, pulling wire, installing equipment, repairing equipment, maintaining equipment, and teaching the customers. In the teaching the customers portion, sometimes it was to teach them how to use their equipment, and sometimes it was from a troubleshooting perspective because they may not have been using it properly. God blessed me very, very well. In 2014, I got divorced. The circumstances that led up to that marriage were when I was in the military. This woman got pregnant, and when I got out of the military, she basically just knocked on my door, handed him to me, and said, "Here's your son, raise him." And I was working a lot of hours, and I met my next door neighbor looking for a babysitter. And so she started watching him, and a few years later, we ended up getting married.
Small world, ain't it?
It's a small world, right? 2013-ish, I filed for divorce from her. The reason being is because when we entered into the relationship and the marriage, it wasn't one that was based in love. It was based on a utility purpose. I needed somebody to babysit my son. She needed somebody to take care of her, and it worked out. My son turned 17, 18-ish, and because there was no love in our marriage, I divorced her. In 2014, after the divorce and everything, my son and we had a disagreement, and he left. And that was in 2014. He left, and even now in 2024, he doesn't have anything to do with me. I mean, we tried a couple times to rekindle our relationship, but it just never worked. That's just the way it goes. So, anyhow, in 2014, all the things that God had blessed me with over that 20 years, they dried up. I had been blessed financially. I had been blessed with my home and my technical expertise in my profession. And I started having nightmares. I started having severe insomnia. And then all of a sudden, my eyes and ears were open to the spirit realm. I began hearing and seeing things that were of the spirit realm. And I felt completely isolated and alone. So there was something I'd felt in that period of time that I'd never felt before, and that was the lack of God's presence with me. I didn't feel it. So anyhow, I went to the church to ask the church, "Hey, what's going on?" And the church, they were judgmental and condemning. I tried several different churches. And so then I decided to call out to Jesus himself, and he answered me. What I know now is, I'm just going to explain it. So when the Lord covers your sins, they're covered until they're not covered. Okay. And I had felt an extreme amount of condemnation for things that had happened over that 20-year period. And Jesus brought some things to my attention that I didn't want to hear, I didn't agree with, and I turned my back on him again. And I felt like in my life, I felt like I was in a snow globe trapped with, these demons and stuff. I couldn't even think without seeing some manifestation of my thoughts. So, in summary, I say that God delivered me from witchcraft twice. The first time was when I was willingly going out and practicing it, and the second time I was thrown into that world. There's a scripture in Matthew 12, verses 43 through 45. One of the reasons that I love God is He has put my finger on verses and given me understanding to why they are true and how I can take these scriptures to the bank and say, look, this is truth. And I've seen enough of them that He's done that with that as far as I'm concerned, they're all true. And if I don't understand something, I don't understand it yet, but it doesn't mean it's not true. So Matthew 12, 43 and 45, it says, when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, he goes through dry places seeking rest and finds none. Then he says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when he comes, he finds it empty, swept, and put in order. Then he goes and takes with him 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. So shall it be. So shall it also be with this wicked generation. That was what happened to me. In 1994, God presented the olive branch, and I didn't keep up my end of the bargain, but it didn't take me. I didn't realize it at the time that was what was going on. I didn't take responsibility for that until much later, and I'll share that in a minute. So, in this world, I was the attention of all of these demons. My eyes and ears were open to all things in the spirit realm. I was seeing and I was hearing. They were manipulating my reality to basically drive me into paranoia and things like that. The second verse that he was able to put my finger on and confirm was Hebrews 12:1. It says, therefore we also saying, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Well, half of that was an application in my life, because every time I would say something, I would hear immediately things in the spirit condemning me or twisting it, or somehow I was being made to regret saying whatever I had said. Yeah, this is something I need to let you know. The first time I heard God's voice, I'll get back to that here in just a minute, but I want to share it. The first time I heard God's voice, I was walking down the street with my ex-wife, and I heard God ask. He said, Adam, where are you? And I said, well, I'm right here. I didn't hear anything else after that. But about a week later, I was sitting on the edge of a canyon, or on the edge of I was on the edge of a canyon with my ex, and I looked to the south, and I saw the number 77 in the clouds, perfectly formed sevens. And I was looking at it, and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And I saw a single bolt of lightning come out of the lower left-hand corner of the 7 on the left. And immediately I heard a voice that said, I beheld Satan fall like lightning. And I looked down at my feet, and there was a little snake about 6-8 inches long at my feet. And shortly after that, things just went absolutely bananas in my life. In 2018, I had been heavily involved in drugs and a very dangerous lifestyle. I felt my heart stop one time from doing the substances, and there's a woman there with me, and she took off bawling. She took off down the hallway just bawling, and I fell back in the chair, and I remember just thinking, I'm like, wow, but ain't this just interesting, But when I realized that didn't kill me, then I began to live much more dangerously. I didn't have anything to lose. So in Labor Day of 2018, there were some people in my house that wanted to do some stuff that I didn't want them to do. And, I hurt one of them. He took off running, and, a few hours, I knew what was going to happen. I knew what was going to happen. So I walked up to the gas station with a friend of mine, and we picked up 2 beers and 2 packs of cigarettes. And we were walking back, and I asked him, I said, "So where's your dad at?" And he said, "Well, he's in prison." So I gave him a beer and a pack of cigarettes, and I said, "Here, that's for your dad when he gets out." And I had the other one, and we sat there and we prayed the Lord's Prayer. That was at about, I was at about, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. And, went home, and, then that guy and his buddies, they tried to hurt me, and I grabbed a knife and I went after them and I hurt one of them. I'll just leave it at that. A couple hours later, the police pulled up outside my house with a bullhorn calling my name, and Brandon, it's the police, we want to talk to you. And I felt very disrespected. And I went out there on the patio, and I saw police officers all over the street. In total, there were 32 police officers there that day. And I looked out there and I saw them, and I just told them, I said, I want an attorney. And I turned around and walked back in the house. When I walked back in the house, they fired 4 bean bags or whatever, but they hurt. I couldn't walk for probably about 2 or 3 days after that. So anyhow, they kept trying to get me to come out of the house, and I was just done with it. I felt completely disrespected. Listen, I'm a veteran. I served my country honorably, and I've done my best to try and follow the rules and not be a danger to myself or others. But for whatever reason, at that point right there, I was just done. I was just absolutely finished. Fast forward several hours later, my mom calls me up. She's freaking out. She had been asleep, and she turned on the news, and she saw my beautiful face on the nightly news, and she freaked out. And I told her what happened, and a couple hours later, it's like 12:30 in the morning. The SWAT team was filling my house with tear gas, and I went outside. They put me in. They walked me. What they had done was they went through my neighbor's yard. They took the fence down to my neighbor's yard, and I went out the back door, and I came around the corner. The entire SWAT team was out there. They took me, put me in an ambulance that was at an adjacent street to where my house was, and the paramedic, he told me, he said, "Those that live by the sword die by the sword." And he gave me an injection in the next 16 hours I have no memory of. When my awareness came back, I was already in the county jail in my, jumper and stuff. I was in the county jail for 7 months, exactly to the day. I went in there on the night of September 2nd, 2018, Labor Day weekend, and I got out April 1st, 2019. They had me on a no bond. The prosecutor said it was because my case was a high profile media case, and they did a psychological evaluation on me, and they had me on no bond. During that 7 months, about halfway through it, they came and picked me up out of my cell, and they took me and they put me in solitary confinement. They didn't tell me why. They just took me and put me in there. There was a holdover, a transfer place. They had brought a psychiatrist or psychologist, somebody, I don't know. But him and the corrections officer were staying outside the door, and they were trying to get me to talk to them. See, I had never given them a statement about what took place. So they were trying to get me to talk, and it made me mad. So I was pretty upset at them. And they were on the other side of the door. I was on the inside. While I was yelling at them and stuff, I heard a voice under my left ear that said, "God bless you," an audible voice. And I heard it, but I didn't let it stop me. So finally, they went on their way, and I went on my way. When I was in that solitary confinement, it was about a month, a little bit over a month or so. I spent Christmas I spent Christmas and New Year's in solitary confinement. God came to me and he asked me, he said, Brandon, can you honestly tell me that you kept our end of the bargain, your end of the bargain that we made? I said, no, I can't. And he said, okay. And from that point on, I felt his presence. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 4 and 5. It says, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not to vow than to vow and not pay. I will leave this earth before I break that vow that I made with him or my marriage vow. I will not break either one of them. I can never leave his side. I don't want to. I have nowhere else to go. And if I ever did, the forces out there would destroy me. And I just have no desire to leave his side. So they let me out after 7 months on pretrial felony bond. And I had to do, all the check-ins and the drug tests and all that. And for 3 years, the prosecutor tried to put me in prison for 8 years. For 3 years, the prosecutor would not get off of that 8-year sentence in prison. And God came to me. He said, Brandon, he said, I want you to pray for the prosecutor. I said, why? I didn't understand why. And he said, let's talk about that. He said, if you ask me to bless them, if their spouse makes them dinner, takes them on a hot date, does something like really nice for them, and he said, if you ask me to be merciful to them, if they don't have any problems in traffic or whatever, if I lighten their load a little bit and, soften their heart, he said, do you think you're going to benefit from that? And I said, well, yeah. I mean, I was looking at 2 to 20 years in prison. I didn't have anything to lose. So I was like, all right, fine, I'll pray for him. And so I prayed. I began praying for the prosecutor. And it took about a month and a half or so of praying for them. And we pushed it all the way to trial. And the Wednesday before the trial was to begin on Monday, my attorney calls me up. He says, hey, Brandon, the prosecutor is offering 2 years deferred adjudication. He said, I recommend that you take this. I said, what does it mean? He says, listen, it's different than probation, because probation, you get a sentence as a judgment. And when you have regular probation, you're allowed to, be in the free world. But you're on probation, but you got a conviction. He said with a deferred adjudication, what happens is you're still going to be on probation, but it's going to be, if you complete everything properly, then the charges get dismissed. I said, really? He says, you got my attention now. He said, I recommend you go ahead and take it. I said, okay, I'll take it. And so the next day we were up there at the judge, we signed it. And then I began the 2 years of deferred adjudication. The enemy tried everything he could. The biblical reference to that section right there is the King Nebuchadnezzar out of the book of Daniel. The Most High says, hey, cut the tree down. And so they come and cut the tree down. And King Nebuchadnezzar, he has the heart of a beast for a while. And then God restores him. But when he restores him, the tree goes back, but it's in bonds. It's got iron bands around it. And that's what God did to me for that 5 years. He had iron bands around me. I was able to function out here in the free world. I was able to do everything I wanted to do. The deferred adjudication, they say, is kind of like making a deal with the devil. Here's why. Because there is no sentence at the end of it. It's a deferred adjudication. So if I had violated that deferred adjudication agreement, and if I had violated any local, state, or federal laws, if there had been any convictions for any of that, the judge could have revoked that deferred adjudication. He could have adjudicated, he could have cast a judgment, which would have been a penalty of 2 years to 20 years in the penitentiary at his discretion. My probation, my deferred adjudication ended at the end of October last year. And something had happened in my life in November of last year, and my heart was just completely shattered. And I went to God and I said, God, everybody I have trusted my heart with on this earth has broken it and shattered it. But you know what? I've seen what you've done. You have not broken my heart. And I told him, I said, if you'll accept my heart, I'll give it to you. And within 24 hours, a lot of that hurt the sadness, the betrayals, all that went away. In October of 2023, I had 3 dreams in a row over a period of about 2 weeks. And in the end of all 3 of these dreams, I was re-entering military service in the middle of December. I prayed and asked God what it meant, and he didn't say nothing the entire month of November. December 8th, I was up in the morning at about 7 o'clock, and I had a vision, and I saw the veil between the spiritual and the physical being removed. Demons were in people, they were roaming the earth, etc. I was like, well, I mean, I'm almost like 50 years old. I'm fat. I'm overweight. They're not going to want me. So he must be talking about spiritual warfare. And then in March, the military comes out with an hour act saying basically, you know, they're trying to get people to come back in, people that are retired and stuff like that. So, I mean, we'll see where that ends up at. But what I do now is I spend my time using the tools and the experience that I learned from when I was practicing witchcraft, when I was thrown back into the pit and I was their enemy. I try to use those tools right now to try and help people to navigate the toxic environment that we have today. That's over in James 3:16, where envy and strife are, there's confusion in every evil work. When people are being contentious, when they're being combative, when they're arguing, when they're fighting, when they're like all up in their emotions and their words are coming out of their mouth faster than their brain can stop them. You know, listen, there's 2 things. You're going to give an account for them words. So control your mouth. In Matthew 18, it talks about the worker who was forgiven a tremendous amount of debt. When he was forgiven, you know, he begged the master to forgive him. The master forgave him. He was compassionate to him. He forgave him. Well, that person, he went out and he held other people's feet to the fire until they paid him what they owed him. Then the others got together and went to the master and said, hey, you see what this guy's doing? And the master's like, hey, he goes to the guy, he tells the guy, he says, hey, I forgave you of your debt. He's like, you held other people's feet to the fire and I forgave you your debt. That guy ended up having to pay back everything that he had been forgiven for. I was kind of in that situation because at 20 years that God had blessed me, he blessed me very well. But I had forgotten him. I believed that I had gotten myself where I was at. It wasn't me, it was him. And when he no longer renewed those tools that he had given me, I was dead in the water. I was dead in the water. We reach a certain level where there is no excuse. I am deeply appreciative that God gave me another opportunity. He did not have to, and I'm not going to piss this one away.
You was talking about being into witchcraft. Exactly how far did you go into that? I mean, incantations or spirits or anything like that?
Yeah, the first time when I was a youngster, I did that kind of stuff. But the second time, I didn't have to. My eyes and ears were completely open to the spirit realm. I saw them in forms, in people.
Your particular situation reminds me of, in other words, the reason it was open was because 7 times worse, right? In other words, once God had delivered you out of it the first time, because of stepping back in that direction, it was 7 times worse the second time. That wasn't no effort into it at all, and it was all just simply already opened back up.
It was just as natural as, you know, walking down the street, man. Just as natural. What I tell people now is the words that we use and the order that we use them in is very important because they're listening. See, every word that we speak, it goes out into the entire spiritual realm.
I know that when we speak by the Spirit, that word can actually carry for generations. It's kind of like what God said in the beginning when he said, let there be light. He said that one time, and here we are 6, 7, whatever 1,000 years later, and we still have light. we can, if we speak by the Spirit, that, and I mean to prophesy, then there is a carrying into the third, fourth, and fifth generations over our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren.
Have you asked yourself why the enemy wants to incite conflict?
Well, the scripture says it's because of the lust of your own flesh.
Yeah, James chapter 4, beginning at verse 1, it goes into that. So listen, when I'm doing things like in TikTok or Facebook or whatever, I have a notepad next to me. And with that notepad, I'm making notes. I'm learning from everybody. I'm learning tactics. I'm learning strategies. I'm learning scriptures. I'm learning weaknesses. I'm learning strengths. And if I can do that, the enemy's doing the same thing. He studies, right? The serpent, right? Genesis 3:1, the serpent was more wise, cunning, crafty, clever, whatever adjective, whatever synonym goes along with that.
I remember God he showed me one time, and I don't fully understand it, but I understand enough of it. The enemy he does not waste a move on you. He is very tactical about what he does, very mindful, very purposeful toward your destruction.
Yes. A person who digs a pit for somebody else, will they themselves fall into that pit?
That's correct.
It's not so much always the enemy, but natural consequences. See, the little choices we make, they add up over a period of time to decisions that make themselves. And those decisions have a reward to go with it. It's not always God's fault. It's not always the devil's fault. Sometimes it's our fault.
What would your advice be to those who are dealing with spiritual warfare, those that's gotten themselves caught up in the witchcraft? What would your advice be to them about how to get out of it?
When we speak a name, it gives life to that entity. Exodus 23:13. And in all that I have said to you, be circumspect and make no mention of the name of other gods, nor let it be heard from your mouth. When we cry and complain about stuff that's happening, that's what we're doing. We're giving power to the enemy. We're giving him authority. We're giving him a legal right in our lives. Because complaining is that stubbornness that he talked about in 1 Samuel 15:23. Stubbornness as iniquity and idolatry. When we put that hurt, that wound, that offense between us and God, so it interferes with our relationship with God, and it also prevents our blessings for a season. We cannot idolize our hurt and our pain and our offenses. So stop complaining. Rejoice in everything.
Brandon, I appreciate this interview.
It's about controlling our environment. We have to be mindful of where our feet go, and we have to control our mouth. In the mouth is life and death. We have power. It's because we have the Spirit of God in us, and the Spirit of God comes with power.